Israel just told its own citizens something that no government in the modern era ever wants to be forced to admit publicly, something that cuts through every layer of official reassurance and emergency protocol language and lands with the full weight of its meaning, that the state can no longer guarantee your safety. Not the usual instruction to stay alert, not the familiar directive to follow shelter procedures, not the carefully crafted government language that is designed to sound authoritative and reassuring, while technically meaning very little. But Israel's official emergency broadcast system, sending a direct message to 7 million of its own citizens that, stripped of bureaucratic phrasing and translated into plain English, communicates exactly this. Our early warning network has been destroyed. We cannot guarantee that we will detect incoming missiles in time to warn you, and from this point forward, you need to take responsibility for figuring out your own survival, because the system we built to protect you no longer functions the way it was designed to function. That single sentence, coming from the government of a country that spent decades of sustained effort and hundreds of billions of dollars constructing what was widely regarded as the most sophisticated, most layered, and most technologically advanced missile defense architecture anywhere in the Middle East, is not just a military update or procedural safety notice. It is the single most significant public admission of strategic failure that any government has made since this conflict began. And understanding exactly what it means in operational terms is the only way to understand everything else that is happening right now. Because here is what that admission actually means in military terms, and why every analyst who has been tracking this conflict understands the severity of what Israel just confirmed. For weeks, Iran has been systematically executing a two-stage strategy that most analysts understood intellectually, but that nobody expected to see completed this quickly and this efficiently. Stage 1 was to destroy the radar systems, the eyes of the defense network that give Israel the ability to detect, track, and respond to incoming threats before they reach populated areas. Stage 2 was to drain the interceptor stockpiles, the fists of the system, the Iron Dome batteries, the Arrow interceptors, and the David Sling platforms that physically destroy missiles mid-flight. Once both stages are complete, missiles arrive without warning and land without resistance, and Israel has now confirmed publicly to its own population that both stages are effectively finished. The early warning system that used to detect incoming missiles 15 to 25 minutes out, enough time to sound sirens across entire cities, get civilians into shelters, scramble countermeasures, and position defensive assets, is now providing approximately 60 to 90 seconds of advance notice, and in some documented cases, even less than that. Those 90 seconds are not enough time to do anything meaningful except realize that something is about to hit somewhere near you, and that there is nothing you or your government can do about it. That is not a defense system anymore. That is a countdown clock attached to a structure that used to be the most advanced missile shield in the region. But the Israeli announcement, as historically significant as it is not even the most consequential development breaking right now, because something happened that crossed a line this conflict has been approaching for months, but had not yet reached. Bahrain directly attacked Iran, not America attacking from Bahraini soil, which had been happening for weeks without formal acknowledgement, and not Israeli jets refueled by American tankers taking off from Gulf airspace under the cover of deniability, but Bahrain directly, with missiles and drones launched from Bahraini territory, flying into Iranian airspace and striking Iranian targets on Iranian soil. A Gulf Arab state formally declared open military hostilities against Iran, and the magnitude of that decision cannot be overstated. Bahrain is a tiny island nation of under 2 million people that hosts the United States Fifth Fleet headquarters and has spent decades as a quiet, careful American partner, never openly combatant, always facilitating, always maintaining the thin layer of diplomatic deniability that kept it technically outside the direct conflict and theoretically protected from Iranian retaliation. That layer of deniability evaporated in a single night, and Iran's response was immediate, overwhelming, and operationally precise in a way that demonstrated the depth of preparation behind it. Iran turned around and struck Bahrain with a wave of attacks that left the country infrastructure reeling, while simultaneously, in a single operational night, executing coordinated strikes against Iraq, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the UAE. 5 countries hit in one night across the entire regional theater at the exact same moment that Bahrain's attack was being processed and answered. This is not a country fighting defensively and scrambling to respond to external pressure. This is a country that has been preparing for exactly this operational scenario. The moment when its adversaries finally abandoned plausible deniability and went fully overt, and had the target packages pre-built, the weapons pre-positioned, the logistics pre-arranged, and the command structure pre-authorized to respond to everything simultaneously across a theater spanning thousands of miles. Qatar is now under full emergency lockdown, with government alerts hitting every mobile phone in the country instructing residents to stay indoors, move away from windows, and shelter in place. This in the city that hosted the FIFA World Cup in front of the entire world just over 2 years ago. The gleaming towers, the luxury hotels, the financial hub of the Gulf region, now under emergency lockdown with missiles in the sky above it. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, Manama, and Riyadh, cities that represented the argument that the Middle East could build something magnificent, ordered, prosperous, and safe, are simultaneously under attack on the same night, a development that would have seemed like fiction 18 months ago and is today's operational reality. And into this burning, simultaneous, multi-country crisis, the United States is sending a third aircraft carrier, along with 10,000 to 15,000 American soldiers, sailors, and pilots, moving toward a theater where the first carrier had already retreated under threat, where Iran has demonstrated operational use of Fattah hypersonic ballistic missiles, the most advanced weapons in the Iranian arsenal, capable of maneuvering mid-flight and bypassing every missile defense system currently deployed in the region, where the Strait of Hormuz is effectively within Iranian firing range, and where Iran has explicitly and repeatedly stated that anything entering these waters will be treated as a valid military target. The Trump administration is calling this leverage. Iran is calling it a target. History will decide which characterization was accurate, but the physics of hypersonic missile technology against current carrier defense systems already have a preliminary opinion. The conflict has moved from a regional confrontation with identifiable boundaries into something that no longer fits a clean analytical category, and the trajectory is pointing toward escalation rather than resolution. President Trump has stated publicly, with the confident certainty of a man reading from a script, that Iran is breaking, that Iran is ready to deal, and that Iran will surrender, a claim he has now repeated 7 times in the span of a single week, with each statement being followed within hours by Iran launching another wave of strikes larger and more geographically distributed than the one before. The gap between what the President of the United States is saying publicly and what Iran is visibly doing militarily has become so consistently wide, so thoroughly documented in real time by satellite imagery and open source intelligence, and so impossible to bridge with any available explanation that it has stopped functioning as a simple credibility problem and started functioning as a genuine strategic warning sign about the quality of decision-making at the highest level of American leadership. When a leader of a major military power repeatedly and publicly claims that an adversary is surrendering while that adversary is visibly and measurably escalating its military operations, one of only 2 explanations is possible, and neither of them is acceptable. Either the leader genuinely does not know what is happening on the ground, in which case the American intelligence apparatus has failed at its most fundamental mission, and the most powerful military in the world is operating on false information in a live conflict, or the leader knows exactly what is happening and is deliberately managing the American public perception of a war being fought with their tax dollars and their soldiers' lives, filtering out the parts that don't fit the narrative of imminent victory. Both possibilities represent catastrophic failures of the kind that historically precede very bad strategic outcomes. Here is what Iran's actual behavior communicates about the timeline the Trump administration has been selling. Iran has announced that it will select and install a new supreme leader within 24 hours of the previous one's incapacitation. And this is the most significant internal signal Iran has transmitted since the conflict began, because it points in exactly the opposite direction of a collapsing state that is running out of will to fight. Selecting a new supreme leader in the middle of active combat operations, under sustained missile strikes from the most powerful military alliance in the world, is an act of institutional continuity under pressure, and it communicates clearly that Iran's governing establishment views itself not as a regime on the verge of collapse, but as a functioning state that is managing an existential challenge, while simultaneously maintaining the administrative and constitutional processes that define it as a governing authority. Collapsing systems do not elect leaders in the middle of wars. Functioning systems do. The selection of a new supreme leader also resolves the most serious operational limitation Iran has faced during this conflict: the problem of 31 decentralized military command centers, operating with standing orders but without unified central authority, which has limited both the coordination of Iran's military operations and, critically, Iran's ability to make binding diplomatic commitments that its own military structures would honor. Once a new supreme leader is installed and recognized across the command structure, Iran simultaneously becomes capable of diplomatic agreements it could not previously guarantee, and potentially more militarily dangerous than it has been during the decentralized phase, because 31 independent command centers with standing offensive orders, unified under a single chain of command, represent a qualitative upgrade in operational coordination. The diplomatic window and the military escalation window are opening at precisely the same moment, which creates a situation of extraordinary complexity and consequence for every government currently engaged in this theater. Now it is necessary to address Britain's decision, which is being buried under the sheer volume of daily military developments, but deserves serious and sustained analytical attention. Britain is deploying long-range bombers and an aircraft carrier group toward the Middle Eastern theater. And this is a country whose citizens cannot reliably afford to heat their homes this winter. A country whose economy has been struggling with deep structural problems stemming from the combination of post-Brexit trade disruption and post-COVID debt accumulation. A country whose domestic political conversation is increasingly dominated by the cost of living pressures that are generating genuine and growing public anger. That country is sailing an aircraft carrier toward a theater, where Iran has already demonstrated the capability to destroy billion-dollar missile defense systems, strike Gulf infrastructure with Fattah hypersonic precision weapons that no currently deployed British system can intercept, and respond to military escalation faster and more precisely than anyone in Western defense establishments predicted. Iran's response to the announcement of British deployment was not diplomatic concern or a request for clarification. It was a direct military statement. Anyone who enters this conflict as a combatant will be targeted as a combatant, without exception, without negotiation, and without the distinction between American and Allied vessels that some Western strategists had hoped Iran might maintain. Britain is therefore sailing an aircraft carrier toward a country that has just told Israel's billion-dollar defense architecture that it can no longer function, toward a theater where America's Patriot missile batteries are operating at significantly degraded capacity, toward an adversary armed with hypersonic missiles that have demonstrated bypass capability against every defensive system Britain has deployed within its carrier group. The strategic military logic of this deployment under these specific conditions is genuinely difficult to construct in terms that hold up to scrutiny. But the political logic is completely transparent. America is asking its closest allies to demonstrate visible commitment to the alliance at a moment when American credibility in the region is under pressure. Britain needs American trade relationships in a post-Brexit world where it has fewer alternatives than at any point in modern history, and the sailors and pilots on that carrier are the tangible price of that political compliance. Meanwhile, the Strait of Hormuz, which carries approximately 20% of the world's total oil supply and represents the single most strategically critical maritime choke point on the planet, has undergone a transformation from one of the busiest shipping lanes in global commerce to a near-empty water corridor that virtually no commercial operator is willing to transit. The before and after satellite imagery tells the entire story in a single comparison. Weeks ago, dense, continuous ship traffic moving in both directions, the commercial lifeblood of the global economy flowing normally through the narrow passage between Iran and Oman. And today, near-empty water, with the occasional vessel visible but no tankers, no cargo ships, no LNG carriers, because Iran has stated unambiguously that anything entering Gulf waters is a potential target, and because every shipping company, every vessel captain, and every maritime insurance underwriter has independently done the same actuarial calculation and arrived at the same conclusion about the acceptable risk threshold for transiting a waterway under active Iranian threat. The economic consequences of a closed Strait of Hormuz are no longer theoretical projections from energy economists. They are appearing in today's oil prices, in today's international shipping rates, in the forward contracts that commodity traders are pricing right now, and they will compound in visibility every week that the strait remains effectively closed to normal commercial traffic, working their way through global supply chains into the grocery bills, energy costs, and manufacturing inputs of populations in Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, and dozens of other nations that have no direct political stake in the conflict, had no voice in the decisions that created it, and are paying its economic costs regardless. It is necessary at this point to be analytically honest about what the United States' actual strategic objective in this conflict has become, because the stated objective, preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons, stopped being a credible, complete explanation several major escalations ago. Iran's nuclear facilities have not been the consistent primary targets of the strikes being conducted in this conflict. The targeting pattern has concentrated heavily on command infrastructure, military leadership, economic capacity, and the kind of institutional architecture that is relevant to regime stability rather than purely to weapons development. President Trump himself stated publicly and explicitly, in the same communication in which he demanded consideration for a Nobel Peace Prize, that his intention includes installing American-aligned leadership in Tehran and securing American access to Iranian oil and gas resources. And that is not counterproliferation policy. And it is not regional security doctrine. And it is not the language of a country trying to reach a negotiated settlement with a sovereign state. That is the language of colonial resource acquisition with a military enforcement mechanism, being pursued against a nation of 90 million people that has 31 active military command structures, an operational hypersonic missile program, proven capability to destroy the most sophisticated missile defense systems in the Middle East, and 45 years of institutional preparation for exactly this confrontation. The honest strategic assessment, stripped of the political framing from every direction, points clearly toward a single conclusion. There is no credible military path to the victory that American stated objectives require, because Iran's population under sustained missile attack, under the most comprehensive sanctions regime applied to any country in the modern era, and under the most sustained external military pressure of any nation in recent decades, is not generating the internal social collapse that regime change through external military pressure requires. The markets in Tehran remain open. Iranian citizens are going about the daily routines of their lives. The internal disintegration that American strategic doctrine required as the mechanism through which external pressure would translate into political change is not happening and was not going to happen, because Iran's population has spent 45 years being explicitly and repeatedly told by its government and its institutions that American military power was eventually coming for them. And they prepared for that reality not with mass capitulation, but with the kind of mass institutional resilience that comes from 4 decades of genuinely believing the threat was real. There is no economic path to victory either, because Iran has been operating under comprehensive American sanctions for 40 years and has built economic structures specifically designed to function under those conditions. And right now, Iran is inflicting more aggregate economic damage on the global system through oil supply disruption, commercial shipping closure, Gulf investment withdrawal, and regional instability than 40 years of American sanctions have inflicted on Iran. The only path that leads to an outcome resembling stability, rather than decades of regional chaos, is the diplomatic one, and it requires acknowledging something that the current administration has made politically impossible to acknowledge publicly. The sentence that every honest analyst, every intelligence professional briefing without political pressure, and every military strategist gaming out the scenarios without a predetermined required outcome eventually arrives at is this: the continuation of American military presence in the Middle East is not the solution to this conflict. It is a central structural cause of it. And Iran's position on this has been consistent, public, and strategically coherent from the beginning of the conflict to today. Remove the bases and the strikes stop. Maintain the bases and the war continues. That is not a complicated diplomatic formula. It is a clear condition with a clear stated consequence, and the Gulf states know it, and they have been quietly communicating some version of it to Washington through every back channel available to them for weeks, even as they publicly maintain their alliance commitments, because American forces are currently the only thing standing between them and a direct military confrontation. They are not equipped to survive independently. 3 American aircraft carriers are now in or actively moving toward the Gulf, representing 15,000 American service members on those vessels alone, plus the tens of thousands more stationed at bases across the region. Britain is deploying. European partners are mobilizing. Qatar is under emergency lockdown tonight. Israel cannot provide meaningful warning to its own citizens about incoming missiles. Bahrain has crossed from quiet American hosting into open warfare with Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is functionally closed to commercial traffic. Iran's Fattah hypersonic missile program has moved from demonstration phase to operational deployment. A new supreme leader will be named within 24 hours, restoring centralized command to 31 active military structures. And the President of the United States is on social media describing all of this as a surrender in progress. The missiles being fired in every direction across the region disagree with that characterization, and they do not care about the narrative being constructed around them. History is being made in real time, and the gap between what powerful people are saying publicly and what the weapons are actually doing on the ground and in the air. And that gap has never been wider in this conflict, and the consequences of the decisions being made inside that gap have never carried higher stakes. Pay attention, because what gets decided in the next 2 weeks does not just determine what the Middle East looks like in 2025. It determines the structure of global energy markets, the future of American alliance systems, the credibility of Western military deterrence, the trajectory of the dollar as a geopolitical instrument, and the fundamental question of whether the rules-based international order that the United States built after 1945 can survive the strain of being weaponized in the way it is being weaponized right now. What happens next determines what the world looks like for the next 50 years.